So let's talk about the theme park that could very well be the idea behind the fifth gate at Walt Disney World, considering this idea has come back from the grave many times. Hey everyone, and welcome back to That Disney Girl, and of course today we are going to be talking about Disney's America. Now for those of you who do not know what Disney's America is, it's basically a theme park that almost came to fruition a whole bunch of times. This is one of the theme parks that was dreamed up by Michael Eisnor, and it was an idea that was being toyed around in the 90s. This idea started in the early 90s and was announced to the public in 1993. This was basically going to be a theme park about the entire Civil War area. It was going to be based around Haymarket, Virginia, which is only 8 kilometers from Manassas National Battlefield Park, which is something that is going to be a little bit of an issue in this whole playing out of the theme park, but we'll talk about that soon. So in this theme park, there were going to be a whole bunch of hotel rooms that were actually going to be inside of the theme park. So you're going to get your shops, and above those shops on the second and third floors, you were going to get rooms. There was going to be a huge golf course, plenty of spots for eating and drinking. Michael Eisnor actually wanted this to become like a whole political center where real debates could take place, and plus it was going to have something sort of like a magical express bus that would take you from the park to Washington DC, so you could see all of the historical monuments. It would really be like a whole history lesson when you visited this Walt Disney theme park. And this all came to be because one day when Eisnor was in Colonial Williamsburg, he dreamt about this idea of having a theme park that had to do with the whole American history of the Civil War. And plus, what Eisnor's goal was to do with the entire Disney company was basically to save it. At this point, the company isn't having too much money in their bank account, and he wanted to find a way to kind of inflate it fully. So one of the ways that he was going to do this was Euro Disney, which we know today wasn't something that had a very strong start. So by having this Disney's America park, it was going to be on a smaller scale. It was going to be educational. It definitely seemed something that would have been a lot more attainable and something that could have been successful. So the park had a $650 million budget, and it was planned to open in 1998 after being announced in 93, but it was quickly shut down in 1994 and then brought back up again in 1997. So let's take a look at the big history in this entire theme park. So like I said, this whole thing springs off of Eisnor taking a trip to Colonial Williamsburg, and he has the idea for the theme park. And when I'm thinking about this theme park, I think it was kind of a good idea. I mean, there are definitely a lot of flaws that we'll talk about later, but I think this would have been a very patriotic park for the entire country of America. It probably would have been really loved by the locals. It definitely would have been like a locals type of park. And we do have good evidence that things that have to do with American history succeed well in the Disney parks. If we take a look at the American Adventure or Hall of Presidents, these are very popular attractions, and attractions that locals and Americans really truly do love. And plus, I think that this park would have attracted guests from overseas who really wanted to come in and learn about all of the American culture. So at the time of its announcement on November 11th, 1993, Disney had already purchased 3,000 acres of land for this project, and it quickly became Eisnor's baby. And a bunch of Virginian governors quickly got behind the project. The Haymarket Historical Commission got behind the project because they knew that this was going to bring 19,000 jobs to Haymarket, and it was going to produce $50 million in tax revenue each year. Basically, in the economic market, this was going to be huge for this town, and Disney knew that, and they used this kind of as a leverage. They said, if you guys want us to come here, you need to fix all of the roads, all of the pipelines that are all connected to the area that we would build this park in, just so that everything looked up to code and up to date, and it was all looking nice and fresh. So then the Disney executives quickly started talking about the parks. Peter Rummel started to state that this was going to be a really fun part, and they were acknowledging that they had to kind of be careful about the political correctness of the park, but Peter was clearly not too worried about it. But that wasn't something that people really commented on. The thing that people commented on was Bob Weiss's comment, which happened early on in the game, but let's talk about that. So what Weiss said was that this is not a Pollyanna view of America. We want to make you a Civil War soldier. We want to make you feel what it was like to be a slave, or what it was like to escape through the Underground Railroad. So as soon as I say that, I feel like you can understand that this was a terrible way to explain what he was trying to say. Quickly, it began to look like the Disney company was about to create this park that was going to monetize slavery and kind of poke fun at it and make it like a fun, adventurous day. If I'm playing devil's advocate, I think that what Bob Weiss meant was that it was going to be highly immersive and educational, and you would get to see what everyone kind of went through, maybe. But I mean, it was pretty crazy that he even said this, and even Eisnor disavowed this. He said that Bob was not someone who was used to talking to the media, and he definitely misspoke, and this is not what the park was going to be about at all. In March of '94, Weiss even came back and said that he did not know where the park was going. It's constantly evolving, and nothing that they say is something that should be taken concrete. So he was definitely trying to cover his own tracks there, but did make a mistake, and it's something that I think definitely started to trigger the negative press about this park. But before we go to that side, let's look at the themed areas of this park. From the 1800s to the 1850s, it would be Crossroads, USA. This is a pre-Civil War era village, and it would be served as the hub of Disney's America. And guests would even be able to enter through an 1840s train trestle, and that would have like antique steam trains, and they would all be circling the parks. And if we're looking at the 1600s to the 1810s, we would have a section for Native America. And this would be a recreation of Native American villages, and it would reflect tribes that were known in that part of the country. So guests would have had interactive experience, learned through art, exhibits, different crafts, and there would even be a whitewater raft river adventure that you would have had travel throughout the whole land. And although that ride never came to fruition, in Disney's California Adventure, we now have Disney's Grizzly River Run, which is basically the same concept, so we can see that Disney kind of is still picking away from this idea. There would be a 1750s through to the 1800s section called President's Square, and in this section we would get the Hall of Presidents from Disney's Magic Kingdom. It would be replicated and it would be inserted into this part of the park. We would have the Civil War Fort from the 1850s to the 1870s, and it would have plunged guests into a more turbulent time of American history. It would have a replica battlefield where Civil War reenactments would be staged, and we would see Freedom Bay where water battles between Monitor and the Merrimack would have been staged for thrilling nighttime spectaculars. So obviously we can see that this was going to be where the nighttime shows would have happened. It would have been pretty interesting because you're not watching Disney characters do things. It would be like real history things do things. So that would have been something interesting to see. I guess right now it's not coming to fruition, but who knows, maybe one day. So from the 1870s to the 1930s, we would get the Enterprise. This would be a mock factory town. It would highlight American ingenuity, where guests would have been able to ride this major attraction called Industrial Revolution. It would have been this roller coaster ride right through to the 19th century. The 1870s through to the 1930s would have hosted We the People, a replica of the Ellis Island building. Here we would get lots of music, restaurants, and tons of live shows. It would be like a little entertainment district. The 1930s through to the 1945 would be the Family Farm exhibit, and this we would be able to see food production, and there would be a whole lot of hands-on experience for guests to enjoy. The 1930s to the 1945s would be the State Fair, and this would be like a Midwest live show. There would be baseball themed and like Coney Island themed rides. There would be a huge Ferris wheel and like this big roller coaster. And then the 1930s to the 1945s would also have Victoria Field, which would be basically a whole area that was dedicated to the sky, to different planes, and the attraction that would be here would be like a hangar, different kind of attraction that you'd be flying over things. And like I said, although we didn't get all of these rides today, a lot of these rides are kind of repurposed, and this one sounds exactly like what Soarin' would have been. So this definitely seems like a really interesting park, and let's see why it never came to fruition. So Disney didn't think that people were gonna hate this idea so much, but the group Protest Historic America really started to stand up for not having this park happen, because they definitely thought this was just going to be like a commercial blitzkrieg and they were just in it to make money. And because this was going to be so close to Manassas National Battlefield Park, a lot of these historical societies thought that this was going to be really rude and hurtful towards the memories of those who fought and died just a mere 8 kilometers away. The groups did not want to see Disney use this as a form of entertainment, and they didn't want to see little, toy figurines of historical slave ships being sold for profit. Those are their words, not mine. This was not something that Disney ever said they were going to do, but I guess they were just kind of assuming that they were going to monetize everything about this historical period. But the people of Haymarket were still really into the idea of having this theme park come to life. They knew that it would be really great for the economy and for jobs, but it was all of the neighboring towns that weren't big fans. They didn't want all the traffic to come in, all the pollution to come in. They didn't want it to start to be built up and commercialized in their town. They wanted it to stay like a small town. And some believe that this was going to take away about 50% of the area's orchard land and 15% of their farmland. So it was going to have some cutbacks on the environment and all of their farmed areas. And the neighboring towns had a good reason to believe that a lot more pollution and traffic was going to come into the town. Disney thought that there would be about 35,000 motorists coming in and out of the town of Haymarket each day. But Disney also said they were going to propose different road maps and different roadways that was going to make transportation good for all motorists, local and visiting. So then an economic report came out by other park opponents that were basically saying that Disney lied about all of the stats for all of the improvements this was going to do economically for the town. So they were saying it was not going to create as many jobs as they said it was going to be almost half of the amount. They said that the jobs that were going to be created were going to be very low paying, and that the tax revenue wouldn't be nearly as high as Disney projected. So this definitely started to get people a little bit upset, and although we don't know if it was true or not, then people started to think that this attraction was going to pull away from all of the actual historical landmarks that Virginia had to offer. So Vice President John Dreher quickly stepped in and said that he thought that a lot of these protesters and people who were opposed to the park were people that just didn't want change. That was their main issue here. They didn't want things to come in and they didn't want their town to change too much. But then a lot of people were saying they didn't want the Civil War era to be taught by Mickey Mouse, and some were saying that they're okay with the park, but they just didn't like the location of it because it was kind of sacrilegious. And I mean, if we take a look at this clip from The Simpsons, we can even see that they commented on it, saying that there is profit to be had.
$5 a child? Last year it was free.
New ownership.
So in this episode, they're clearly on the opposition side, whose beliefs are that Disney would have done anything to make profit. So like I said, this was Eisnor's baby and he came out swinging. He wanted to defend this idea, and this is what he said. Disney's America not only will not replace historic sites, but rather will add to their luster by enthusing guests about the events that occurred there and the people who took part in them. We are confident that our project will actually encourage more people to visit historic areas, and we believe our presentation of the American heritage can make a significant national contribution to the important cause of historic preservation. So Disney was planning on using all of their tools to kind of boost up and use this theme park as a platform for American history, which I totally could have seen as something that would have worked out. I mean, if I was visiting there as a Canadian, I think I would have definitely learned a lot more about American history, just because I would be a little bit more interested and inclined to learn since it was at a Disney theme park. Eisnor actually went at a lot of the historians that were refuting this park by saying that he read a lot of their history books and that they weren't very interesting and that he was actually falling asleep during them, so he wanted to find a way to reinvigorate American history and learning it through education. He also reminded everyone that this was going to be a private site, it was not a historic site at all, and he even took it one step further by bringing historians to the different Disney American themed attractions. The historians actually hated the American Adventure, but they loved Hall of Presidents, so I guess you win some and you lose some here. And on September 28th, 1994, we found out that this park was no more. There were too many setbacks, a lot of setbacks that were coming with the delays and the oppositions that were happening here. It was pushing different clearances that the park needed to start building even further and further back. This was costing them even more and more money, and it seems like they decided to cut their losses at this time. So although Disney did believe they would get official approval for this park, they didn't think they would really get the public approval in time to stop all of these unexpected delays, and then by 1995 they had put the land that they purchased up for sale. And now that land is actually being used for a bunch of different housing units. So if you live in that area, you live on something that could have been a Disney park. But Eisnor still wanted to build a park like this, but do it in a less controversial way, and that is when Disney's America Celebration came to mind in 1997. Also, did I note that Disney's America, just that name alone, was something that was really controversial because people didn't like the idea that Disney was saying they kind of owned America. And the interesting thing about the concept about this second reimagining of the park was that it was being created before Disney's America, the original idea, was even shut down. So I guess they could kind of see into the future that it wasn't going to work, and they started to find ways to reconfigure it. So there were going to be planned pavilions in Disney's America celebration. So let's take a look at what those were going to be and how they compare to what Disney's America would have had. So there would have been a democracy pavilion. So that would be the entrance area with attractions such as America, a user's guide, the American Free Speech Forum, and the American Hall of Fame. There would have been a family or generations. This would have been like multimedia shows about American families, about all the generations from 1929 to 1999. There would have been a land pavilion, so this would have been based on the Epcot attraction that we have now. There would have been a creativity and fun pavilion, and this one was going to be quite similar to the state fair model that we had in Disney's America. There would have been a section that dealt with factory tours from older to newer American companies. So we had service and sacrifice, and this would have been very similar to what we saw in Disney's America for Victory Fields. We would have gone through different kinds of attractions that brought us different soldier stories and stories from that sort of era. And there also would have been a section where guests could start to try out different military training. So that would have been another interactive element we would have got from it. And we would have had a pavilion dedicated to kind of like immigrants and telling the story of them and the story of coming into America. And this would have been done through a ride vehicle with screens that had to do with the Muppets. So that would have been an attraction we could have got. And we would have got the Streets of America in between all of these, which would have been definitely great for different photo ops, theming, and probably a lot of different food options. So those were going to be places like Chicago, LA, New York, San Francisco, New Orleans, St. Louis, all of those places. And you would have had Disney's America Live. This would have been an entertainment venue that would have outdoor stages for the State Farm Arena, which guests could attempt hog calling and calf roping. But if you recall, they sold their land, so where was all of this happening? The location that became available to them would have solved a few problems. Eisnor decided that when he was kind of doing this whole reimagining and reinvigorating of the Disney company, that he was going to put another park in California. And the land that was becoming available to them was actually the old Knott's Berry Farm, and this was just a short ride away from the Disneyland Resort, so he thought he could kill two birds with one stone here, basically by recreating this dream he had and by putting a second park in the California area. And plus, Knott's Berry Farm had a replica of the Independence Hall there, so it was kind of like it was meant to be. There was fate here. They wouldn't have to kind of take down everything. There were some things they would have built upon. That Independence Hall would have actually become like the Liberty Square that we see in Walt Disney World, which would have been the entrance to this park. So there are two reasons that Disney has stated as to why this park didn't work out in this location. I think the second one is the actual reason, but let's look at both. So for number one, it was because the location of it. Although it was in California, it was still pretty far from the Disneyland Resort. They couldn't find a good way to get busing to happen with a good amount of time, and they thought that building a monorail to this second park was going to cost way too much money. And the second idea and the true reason that this park never came to be was that the Knotts family turned Disney down. The siblings that were still around thought that they did not want Disney to take this park and take away everything that their parents created and imagined it to be. They did not like the Imagineering that they were seeing presented to them, so they said no to Disney. The interesting little caveat here for Knott's Berry Farm was that when they sold it to Cedar Fair, they actually did a lot more remodeling and changing to the area than Disney would have done. So will this ever become a fifth gate or another Disney park? I mean, I don't know if this is ever going to become a standalone park on its own. It's definitely had a lot of hurdles that it never got to clear, but I do think that different Imagineering that went into the creative concept of this park is going to be seen as we've already been seen through different attractions that were thought of for Disney's America but are now in different Disney parks that we have today. Now I want to know what you think. What do you think about this park? Do you wish it was here? Are you glad that it never happened? Would you want it to be a fifth gate? And am I missing anything? I'm sure that there is so much more information and history about this huge part of the Disney parks history, so if you know any more about it, definitely comment them down below. And if you've enjoyed listening to this whole Disney history lesson, you gotta make sure that you give this video a nice big thumbs up. And with that being said, I will see you real soon. Okay, bye everyone.